Hi everyone. In this video I want to show you a quick and easy way how you can produce great documentation or tutorials for your newly created R package, for an existing R package, or in fact for software packages in a number of different programming languages that ChatGPT currently understands. Now, I know that software documentation is probably not the most fun part about programming, but I recognize that not documenting certain features or creating haphazard documentation can create barriers. It means that we exclude certain people from computational social science or from data science that might otherwise make great contributions. And it also often means that just less people pick up our software because they don't understand how it works or they think we didn't put a lot of time into it. And time is the limiting factor usually when it comes to software documentation. But with the advent of large language models, this might not be a factor anymore. I noticed that creation documentation with them is very quick, and the documentation and tutorials that you can create are actually often better than what you would have come up with as a technical person, because you can tell it to make the documentation easy to understand. So I want to show you how you can do this with ChatGPT. And for those of you who lived under a rock for the last year, I guess, ChatGPT is a next level chatbot that utilizes a large language model, in this case GPT-4. And this language model is employed to generate answers to all kinds of questions that you can ask it. The great thing for our purpose here is that it is perfectly able to understand R code. It is actually very capable in understanding a lot of code in different languages. But for now, let's look at R code. And you can see when I ask it to explain this ggplot code here, it does a pretty good job of explaining it. I could also ask for some other examples how to use ggplot, and it would come up with some pretty good ones. I've tested this in the past. It is a really nifty tool to try and understand existing R code. It is not perfect by any means. The biggest problem here is that even if it doesn't know a package or it doesn't know how specific code works, it will be eloquently and confidently wrong in explaining what the code is doing. And if you are used to normal human beings, this will kind of throw you off a little bit, because you cannot guess from the language alone if the model is capable of understanding the R code that you've provided. So you really need to watch out, but I think in our case that's not a big problem. We've created the functions that we want to document, so it should be no problem at all to see any errors that the model does in explaining what a specific piece of R code does and in documenting it. As a use case for this, I brought this new package I'm working on called cookiemonster. And this essentially wraps a couple of functions that I created in two other packages that I'm working on. One is called TrackTalk, and I use it to scrape data from TikTok. The other one is called Paperboy, and it can download newspaper articles from a lot of different websites. In both cases, I need browser plugins. In both cases, I need browser cookies to identify myself as a certain user, and then we can access this. That's just a little bit of background. I noticed that I have a lot of code duplication, so I moved the code into this new package here, but the package is very bare bones. There's essentially no documentation here. It is just a bunch of functions so far. So an ideal case for showing you how this can work with ChatGPT. And first I want to work in the normal interface here. And I'm using a couple of sentences to prime ChatGPT in giving me specific answers. So as a first instruction here, I'm asking it, you are helping me to document functions in R using Roxygen2 syntax. This is important. Roxygen2 is just this R package, which is basically the standard for documenting functions today. Make sure that your replies are easy to understand by an R novice. This is our target group, and it should be the target group for most packages that are provided by academic researchers. It should contain examples, and it should be fun to read. So cookiemonster is kind of a fun name for this purpose. It's something very technical, but I want to keep the mood light here. So yeah, let's make this fun to read. This is for a package that deals with browser cookies. Keep that in mind. And then finally, the prompt that I'm using here. So this is the instructions part. This is the prompt. Document this R function using Roxygen syntax. Then I can go to RStudio here. I just copy the first function. I plug it in here. And let's see what ChatGPT is doing with this function. So the first thing I like here is always very positive. Absolutely. Let's cook up a delicious Roxygen 2 documentation for browser cookie. It gives a little bit of background about Roxygen 2 syntax, which I appreciate, even though, yeah, I already know what's going on here. And then it's starting to document add cookies to the browser. This function allows you to add browser cookies using either. Okay, so a little fun explanation. Cookie file, a character string indicating the path to the cookie file. This is correct. Cookie string, a character string representing the cookie in a string format. This is also correct. And then host, an optional parameter that specifies the host. It is only used when cookie string is provided. Yeah, that's true. So in a cookie file, the host is already included. In a cookie string, we don't know the host yet. So I added this additional host parameter here. Return, no explicit return. Instead, this function stores the cookies using the store cookies function. That's also correct. Return is now required as a parameter by CRAN. So it's useful to have this here. And then example using a cookie file. Assume my cookies contains the cookie details, add cookies, my cookies, and so on, using a cookie string. Username John Doe. Yeah, this is a correct cookie string. And then as the host, example.com. That's perfect. Note, you can't provide both cookie file and cookie string at the same time. That's true. That's like trying to dunk 2 cookies in a tiny cup of milk. Well, yeah, let's keep it light. I actually quite like this. See also store cookies, read cookie file, and so on. Not sure if we need that, but let's keep it in here, and we can go back to R and basically just paste this explanation, which I quite like. Now, the only thing I would do in this case is to reflow comment, which is just a built-in function of RStudio. It's under code here, reflow comment, and what it does is it inserts line break, so this is easier to read. Now, I actually mostly really like this explanation. I would only change a couple of things. This function allows you to add browser cookies to the cookie storage. And I would say it can work either with a cookie file or with a cookie string. Let's reflow again. For example, copied from a curl call, because I think that this is probably where a cookie string would come from if you just go to your browser and you copy a curl call from there. And then here, cookie character string indicating the path to the cookie file. That's fine. Character string representing the cookie in a string, also fine. This is all good. The problem here is that my cookies.txt doesn't exist. Obviously, ChatGPT had no way of knowing this, but if I would now try to use DevTools check, for example, to check if everything is working, it would indicate that this specific example can't run because my cookies.txt isn't working. In the bare bones vignette that I want to look at later, I've already solved this problem. Let's have a quick look at it. Specifically, I have a system file here, which is a valid cookies.txt file that we can use for examples. So let's just plug this in. Yeah, and then this should run now, which is perfect. We can now use DevTools document or Roxygen directly, but let's use DevTools directly. And now when I install this package, it's loaded automatically. We can look at the documentation for add cookies, and you can see it's now nicely rendered. We see the description here. We have the usage, we have the documented arguments, the values. We have this node here. And then at the bottom, we have one example for each of the two ways that you can use the package here. And I see that the style is a little bit off here, but that's no problem. We can quickly fix this. So this is great. However, we can speed this up even more. We can use the package I mentioned earlier, askgpt, directly from within R to make this documentation. But in order to do this most effectively, we first want to set this up a little bit. So to configure askgpt, we can set a number of options. All of the options start with askgpt _, and then we have options for the chat API and the completions API. So the chat API will reply to you like a chatbot. The completions API will simply perform the task and only return the result of a completion instruction that you asked for. So when we ask to document code, for example, it will only return the documentation. It won't return something like, certainly I can help you with this, and all of the other stuff that right now we don't really want. But later on, we'll also use the chat API. So this is why I use GPT-4 and a somewhat older version of the model, because I've recently read some articles about model degradation over time. So supposedly GPT-4 is getting worse as it interacts with humans a little bit more. Just to completely evade this problem, I use an older model from March. And then the newest model that we can use in the completions API, or that I can use in the completions API, I'm not completely sure, is GPT 3.5 Turbo, which should be pretty close to GPT-4 though. And then I simply copied in the same instructions as before. You're helping me to document functions in R using Roxygen 2. Make sure to make your replies easy to understand for an R novice. And this is for a package that deals with browser cookies. Just keep this in mind. So not sure if I actually loaded askgpt, no. And now I set these options. And then when I go back to the R source file, I can now hit add-ins and then document code. It takes a little bit while R waits for the API to return an answer. And now we have this short documentation here. This function stores cookies in a jar. Yeah, that's fine. Data frame of cookies. The directory to store cookies in defaults to what the default jar function returns. And that's essentially it. That's all that we want to have right now. Later on, I will probably build in some safety so people can't just put any files in here. But for now, this is fine. And we can move on to the next one. Document this as well. Get the default jar. So here it just returns the default, and it would actually be quite good if getOption was also explained here. So the way this works is that by default, whatever the package RStudio returns here is used as the cookie jar, but people can set their own directory for storing cookies with the option cookie here. So it would be good for people to know this. And in order to improve this documentation, we can use a second add-in, which is the improve add-in. And here it simply uses the already highlighted code. And then I can give the chat API some instruction. And what I want to do here is improve the documentation for the function below. Okay, so now when I'm happy with this prompt, I can simply click on improve. And because this is using the chat API, it won't directly replace the documentation in the R code, but it will put this in a new file. So let's wait for a second. Okay, get the default cookie storage directory jar. This function returns the default directory jar for storing cookies. Users can set their own cookie storage location by using options, code your cookie directory here. So I prefer to write it like this, so it already looks kind of like a directory. If no custom directory is specified, the default directory used by will be returned. Yep, that makes sense. Return a string representing the path to the default cookie storage directory jar. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I love that. That's exactly what I probably would have come up with after thinking quite a bit longer. So I think that is perfect. There are two more functions in this document, but I do not want to expose them to the user. So for those who are unaware, you can either have exported functions. So these are the ones that the user will see when they load your package and can easily use. And then you have non-exported functions. Users can still access them, but the idea is that these are really like background functions that a user should never need to look at. So this deals with storing cookies. Then there is a second file here, which is used to define functions that can then retrieve the cookies from the storage. So let's give these the same treatment. Okay, retrieve cookies from a jar. Domain a character string of the domain to retrieve cookies for. Yeah, that is correct. A character string of the path to the cookie jar. The default is to use. Okay, let's add some explanation about that. As a character string of the type of output to return, depending on the value of code, returns either data frame, character string, or list. This should be fine. So I included all of the valid options in here. So that should be okay. Now, what I noticed though is that it deleted the actual function. So let's undo this. All right. Get examples, get cookies, example.com. Yeah, that's fine. Although example.com, I probably don't have any cookies for that. Instead, what I'm using here is HTTPS HB dev, which is just a simple server that you can use for development. And in the example, it probably makes sense to retrieve these cookies because everyone should have them if they've run through the example. And then here, all of this import stuff is not necessary. I explicitly use the two colons to get functions from other packages. So all of the importing is a little bit too explicit for me. See also add cookies. That is a good reference. It also reminds me that there were some references here and we don't really need them. So let's remove them because they're linking to undocumented functions, which could be really confusing, and I don't want that. See also code add cookies. Yeah, I think that's fine. The reference is also nonsense, and then I don't know why it would put internal here, because this is obviously not an internal function. This is one that I want to export, so it doesn't work perfectly every time, but yeah. And then we can hit improve again if we want to, and note that my old instruction is still used here. So is this still valid? Improve the documentation for the functions below. Make sure to explain how one can, yeah, we don't need that. Yeah, let's make sure to include let's say a fun description. Let's see what GPT comes up with here. Okay, this is probably a little bit much. Delightfully fetch cookies, this whimsical function. Yeah, not really. Right, so so I like this comment here. But I think the other stuff is probably a bit much. Let's see, is there anything that we can use from here? Okay, why not? I mean, it's not a whimsical function, but the rest of the description, I think, is better than nothing. Okay, let's reflow this. And here we go. And then the last one, after you've retrieved the cookies, is to prepare them. But this is now used under the hood here, so I don't really want to export it, and I can just add a brief explanation for people who are looking at the source code. One thing that I would note here in the details that GPT couldn't possibly know is that the data frame is not really that useful for us, but string is used in curl and HTTR2, and the list output is used in the old legacy HTTR package. So I will add some details here later. But for now, let's move on. For me, documentation is not just the documentation of each individual function, but what I believe is probably even more important is to have some good tutorials in your package or somewhere on the web. And in R, we call these tutorials that get packaged with the R package vignettes. We can create a new vignette using use vignette from the use this package, and I give it the name cookie here and the title using cookiemonster. So this is creating a new file, and the purpose was just to show this, so we can delete that and we can use the version that I created beforehand. And what this is here is essentially the skeleton of a vignette. So I have the stuff that is created from use this, and then I added all of the functions in here that I want to walk people through. I also have a short explanation here on how to obtain cookies. This is just copied from the TrackTalk package. And then for the other chunks here, I simply have a one-liner, not even a real sentence, just pointing towards what each of the functions is doing. So here it's getting the default location for the cookie jar, setting an option, and then I show how the package can be used with HTTR2, HTTR, and the curl package. And now what I want to do is to use another RStudio add-in called Tutorialize Code. This is very similar. It also looks very similar to the Improve add-in, but this is specifically made to make tutorials. I'm not using the default prompt here. I'm saying turn this into a vignette introducing the cookiemonster package. So let's try this one. All right, so this looks pretty good. Welcome to the cookiemonster package tutorial. And I'm assuming this is an emoji that will hopefully be displayed in the right way when you open this in a browser or on GitHub. But in RStudio, emoji support is a little bit flaky, so it's not displayed here. In this vignette, you'll learn how to use cookiemonster to effectively manage browser cookies when working with R. Yeah, that's correct. That's actually very nice. So keep in mind that this was produced using the same configuration as before, so helping me document and so on. This one doesn't fit anymore, but I still left it in there, and then the rest make it easy to understand. Dealing with browser cookies, all of this still applies. So I think that's very nice. To work with cookies, you'll need to export the necessary cookies. So it changed this, and I think it's more understandable now. It also rearranged the sentences a little bit. It starts by for Chromium based and then for Firefox. Yeah, that's fine. Now let's copy an example cookie file from the package. Yes, that's exactly what I want to do here. Add the cookies from the file to the cookie jar. Yeah, that's it. You can find the default cookie. So it essentially expanded all of the sentences I used here and made them a little bit more readable to retrieve and so on. So yeah, I think this is already not too bad. However, let's see if we can get something that's a little bit better using a different prompt. So first of all, let's remove this maybe. And let's run this again. We can also use the new conversation here from askgpt. This is essentially removing what we've done before from the conversation, and it's starting a new conversation. If you've worked with ChatGPT, you probably know the little button and you can just start a new conversation. This is what we're doing here. So let's try this again. I'm highlighting this once more and saying tutorialize. So we want to add a little bit to this. Okay, so now I added some more detailed instructions. We leave this, turn this into a vignette introducing the cookiemonster package. Make sure to explain what browser cookies are, make it easy to understand how to send requests using the modern HTTR2 package, the legacy HTTR package, which is still used by a lot of developers, and the curl package, which is the backbone of the other two, but mostly targeted at experts. So this was my rationale for describing how to use cookies with all three of them. They are targeted towards different audiences. So let's see what kind of tutorial this prompt creates. Okay, so I see that ChatGPT added this first sentence here, or first two sentences. Welcome to the cookiemonster package, a one-stop solution to help you navigate the delicious world of browser cookies. I like that. In this vignette, we will explain what browser cookies are, how to read and store them using the cookiemonster package, and interact with them using the modern HTTR2 package, the legacy HTTR package, and the powerful curl package. So it followed my instructions. I like the tone of this. I also like that ChatGPT tends to have a little introduction sentence, and probably it has a little closing sentence as well. Happy cookie monstering. Yeah, okay, not as much, but often it has this little summary conclusion at the end. What are browser cookies? So I asked for this explanation. That's great. Browser cookies are small pieces of data that websites send to your browser to store and later retrieve. They help websites remember your preferences, login information, or even the items in your shopping cart. Cookies play a crucial role in making your browser experience smooth and personalized. That is exactly it. Reading and storing cookies. So what's missing here is why you would want to use them from R. Maybe we can add this later. Reading and storing cookies using a cookiemonster package. Yeah, now let's add the cookies from the file to our cookie jar and remove the original cookie file. Yeah, so this is more meant as like a cleaning up when I'm rendering the vignette. ChatGPT doesn't know that, but I only include this so that the cookie file, which is copied to the folder, is later then removed. Echo false means it's not included in the original tutorial, but that's fine. We can quickly clean that up. Default cookie storage, cookiemonster package stores cookies in a default location. To see this default, yeah, I like this a lot. Now let's see how to use stored cookies with the HTTR2 package, to use stored cookies with the legacy HTTR package. So I think this is really fantastic. I like this a lot. Now, when you're kind of workshopping a vignette or different texts in general with ChatGPT, one thing to remember is that ChatGPT is non-deterministic. You can set it up in a way that it is, but by default it's non-deterministic, which is just a fancy word for saying the results that you get are kind of random, so they will be different each time. So one thing that we can do here is we simply let it perform the same task again. So I'm doing a new conversation and I'm telling it again to tutorialize code. The same prompt is still in here, and I'm hitting it again to see if we get a different outcome. All right, now the second version of this, and I accidentally overwrote the old file. So you can see this automatically creates an RMD file using the prompt as the file name. So unfortunately, the first response is gone, but let's have a look at this one. Welcome to the cookiemonster package. This package helps you manage browser cookies in R, making it easy to work with cookies when sending HTTP requests. Before we dive into the functions and features of the package, let's briefly discuss what browser cookies are. Yeah, I like that a lot. I think that's better than the first version. In this vignette, we'll show you how to use the cookiemonster package with the popular HTTP request libraries, the modern HTTR2 package, the legacy HTTR package, and the curl package, which is the backbone of the other two, but mostly targeted at experts. That's almost exactly what I wrote, but yeah, I'm happy with that. Recommended extensions are slightly different version, and then here I think it falls short a little bit. It's not as good as the first one because it's not really explaining what's going on here. Let's copy an example cookie file from the R package and I could add it to the cookie jar. Okay, yeah, that's fair enough. So this time around, it actually has this little summary at the end, which I think is cool. But I think the version before, which I was able to get back by simply hitting undo, I think that had a little bit more detail, which I think is nice. So now what we can do is I can simply produce one version of the two that ChatGPT has produced. Okay, so now I created what I think is the best version of the two. So basically copying together and then adding some of my own explanation here. What I still think is a little bit lacking is the explanation of the individual things that are happening in the code chunks here. So for this, I can use a third plugin called Annotate Code. And let's see what's happening when we're using it on the HTTR2 code chunk. Okay, so interestingly, ChatGPT does not seem to understand HTTR2 code. It is possible that the package is simply too new and there isn't a lot of training data within the model. So I think I have to add the explanation myself here. But let's see how it does with the HTTR package. Okay, so this isn't really a good annotation, but actually I like the explanation here. So let's just finish this up with some manual edits here. All right, and now that I'm fairly happy with this quick introduction to cookiemonster, what I can also do is to put it back into ChatGPT to produce different versions of it. So for this, I'm using the improve command again, and I'm saying, yeah, let's have some fun. Rewrite this in the voice of cookiemonster from the Sesame Street. Now, this can be a really powerful tool if you know your target audience. cookiemonster is more of a backbone package for other developers who want to integrate it into their web scraping package or maybe into the web scraping script. So for this, what comes out of this task of using the cookiemonster voice is probably a little bit too whimsical. But other alternatives would be to have this in really simple English, to have this in words for a beginner. If you include a model in this, for example, a variation of a topic model or a variation of a regression model, you could include some explanation what these models mean and how you can use them. And sometimes if we read up on the mathematical background of these models, we tend to be a little bit too technical in our writing. So we can say, explain this as a story about a wizard or something like this. So just to force ChatGPT to use different words than the mathematical terms to make it easier to understand. But first, let's have a look at this whimsical example. I couldn't get the whole thing through because it seems that the API is currently experiencing some problems. So I just translated the first paragraphs, and you can see that this works quite well. Me welcome you to cookiemonster package, yum yum. And I mean, it is just to show that you can rewrite tutorials in as many different versions as you like. Something that I really like to do is to just reiterate and tell it to make this easy to understand for our novices, and then maybe adding some information. So for example, here I already told it to explain a little bit that curl is the backbone of HTTR and HTTR2, and if you want to use it directly, you can absolutely do that, but it's more for advanced users. I could use ChatGPT to rewrite this or to rewrite tutorials from one of the other packages that are around where I think the explanation is a little bit too technical. Or in fact, I think what would make this even better is if someone who doesn't know that much about R and about the technical background here uses ChatGPT to rewrite a tutorial until they are satisfied with the explanation. You can also directly use askgpt to ask questions. So for example, if you have no idea what browser cookies are, you can just enter this directly in here. And then you can read the explanation and basically copy this together. And that would be really helpful for the developers. I would really appreciate something like this. And I think that most R developers would welcome a pull request that improves the documentation somehow. And this way you could become a contributor to an R package, even though you can't write code that well, for example. So here it produced this little answer, and actually I really like this. So it included some of the examples here, and I assume that it learned this simply from our conversations. So the conversation history is saved in askgpt by default. So every new request that you send also sends all of the old stuff. So here it seems that actually ChatGPT learned a little bit from what I've been doing with browser cookies here. And this concludes this little demonstration of askgpt and how you can use it to write your software documentation, to write your tutorials, or to improve them. I really hope I can encourage other developers to use large language models on their research software. And I hope that also in the future we can use open source language models for this. So right now there's a lot of talk about Llama, for example, which is supposedly getting to the same level as ChatGPT or as GPT 3.5 and getting towards the level of GPT-4. It's a little bit tougher to set up at the moment, and that might be a problem, but it's also more privacy friendly, it's free, and so on. But in general, I hope that showing you some of the prompts I've been using, showing you the add-in and how I can use it to improve my documentation has encouraged you to either improve your own documentation or to go ahead, improve the documentation of someone else, write a PR, and hopefully they appreciate it. Sometimes it could make more sense to ask beforehand. But even if they don't accept your PR, you still have documentation that works better for you. And with that said, happy coding.